Ferris Langston was 2 seconds from canceling the trip when his assistant reminded him the yacht was already paid for in full and non-refundable. "Just go," she'd said. "You've been working 14-hour days for 3 months straight. You're one headline away from a full-blown coronary." So now he stood at the edge of a small harbor in coastal Maine, in loafers completely unsuited for the fish guts and saltwater smell hitting his face. He pulled off his sunglasses and squinted at the boat he'd been instructed to look for the Blue Wren. It was a modest 35-footer, not the luxury vessel he'd imagined when he requested something comfortable. He was expecting champagne and a hired crew. What he got was a single woman climbing barefoot onto the deck, tightening a rope with strong arms and a long braid swinging down her back. She turned and their eyes locked. "Langston," she called, raising an eyebrow. He blinked. "Yeah." "Ferris Langston." The woman walked toward him, wiping her hands on the thighs of her cut-off jeans. Captain Briar Gentry." She stuck out a hand and he hesitated. She wasn't what he expected. No uniform, no deckhand, no polished customer service smile. Just sun-kissed skin, a firm handshake, and the kind of no-nonsense confidence that made him feel like the overdressed city boy he was. "You're the captain?" he asked, trying not to sound as thrown as he felt. "That's what the license says," she said, climbing back aboard. "You coming or just sightseeing from the dock?" He followed her, dragging his sleek leather duffel across the gangplank. The inside of the boat was simple, clean, but practical. No marble finishes, no chilled wine waiting, just a cooler, a few rods, and the faint scent of citrus cleaner. "I thought there'd be crew," he said. "You thought wrong," Briar replied, pulling the engine to life. "It's just me. And now, unfortunately, you," he narrowed his eyes, "you always this charming to paying clients." Briar glanced at him, then shrugged. "Only the ones who show up in Gucci shoes." The boat pulled away from the dock with a rumble, and Ferris sat down, adjusting his blazer. She caught the movement and shook her head. "You're gonna ruin that thing out here." "I didn't exactly pack for this," she echoed, steering them into open water. "This," he said, gesturing to the choppy waves, the bare-bones boat, and the fact that she was steering it like she owned the ocean. "I signed up to unwind, not get tossed around like a rag doll." She threw him a look over her shoulder. "You want a floating spa? You booked the wrong trip. Out here you fish, you sweat, and if you're lucky you catch something." He leaned back, baffled by her. Ferris Langston, CEO of Langston & Vale, Fortune magazine darling, man who negotiated 8-figure corporate mergers without blinking, was being bossed around by a boat captain in denim shorts. And for some reason, he didn't mind it. The first hour was rough. Ferris hated the rocking, hated the way the wind messed up his hair, hated that Briar seemed to enjoy watching him struggle with the fishing rod like it was a toddler's toy. "Try not to let it go overboard," she said casually, sipping from a battered thermos. "I run one of the largest financial firms in Boston," he muttered, gripping the pole. "This shouldn't be hard," she laughed, low and unbothered. "Out here, the fish don't care about your portfolio." He glanced at her. She was leaning against the side rail, hair whipping in the breeze, sun catching on her cheekbones. There was something raw about her, no makeup, no filter, no pretense. He didn't know what to do with that. "You do this full time?" he asked. "Yep, charter runs mostly. Sometimes I take locals out for lobstering or mackerel, whatever's biting." "No crew, no need," she said. "I trust myself more than I trust anyone else." Ferris nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. "I get that." She turned toward him. "You, me what? What made you book a fishing trip alone?" "You don't look like you've ever touched bait in your life," he cracked a smile. "I needed a break. I haven't taken a real vacation in 7 years. My assistant forced me to come." Briar raised an eyebrow. 7 years. "What, you allergic to fun?" Something like that. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It was calm, the kind of quiet Ferris hadn't experienced in a long time. Then his rod jerked violently and he nearly dropped it. "Whoa, what the reel it in?" Briar shouted, lunging forward. Don't let it slack, he fumbled, trying to follow her instructions, but the fish was fighting hard. Keep the tip up higher, no, not like that, you're gonna snap it. She grabbed his hands, steadying the rod with her own. Her body pressed close to his, her breath on his neck, her hands over his together, they reeled. The fish broke the surface, seconds later a silver flash, and Briar whooped. Nice one, she said, grinning wide. You got a striped base. Ferris looked at her, heart pounding. Not from the fish. From her, that night they docked at a quiet inlet where she anchored for the night. You can sleep below deck, Briar said, tossing him a pillow. It's not the Ritz, but it doesn't leak. Ferris stared at the stars above them. Mind if I stay up a bit, she nodded. Suit yourself. She joined him on the bow, sitting cross-legged beside him. You always do overnight charters, he asked. Only when I like the company. He turned to her. So, you like me now, she met his eyes. You're tolerable. For a guy who wears cologne to fish, he laughed, then looked at her longer. You're not like anyone I've met. That's probably a good thing. I mean it, he said, her expression softened. He didn't know what came over him, but he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't pull away, her voice dropped. You'll be gone in the morning, back to your big city boardrooms. Maybe I don't want to go back tomorrow, she looked at him, eyes searching his. Then don't. And suddenly, for the first time in over a decade, Ferris Langston wasn't thinking about stock prices or quarterly margins. He was thinking about her. Ferris woke to the scent of salt and something sizzling. He blinked against the soft light filtering through the small porthole above the bunk. The cabin was warm, the sounds of gentle water lapping against the hull blending with a faint clatter from above. He pushed himself up, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, and climbed the short ladder to the deck. Briar stood over a small portable stove, flipping something in a pan. Her braid had been redone, tighter this time, and she wore a sweatshirt that hung off one shoulder, the sleeves pushed to her elbows. She didn't look up. You sleep like a rock, she said, placing 2 plates on the bench. I don't usually, Ferris said, taking the seat across from her. Must have been the fresh air. More like the exhaustion, she said, passing him a plate of eggs and toast. You looked like someone unplugged your battery last night. He took a bite, surprised by the flavor. This is actually good. I'm not just a boat captain, she said. I can cook too. You're welcome. He watched her dig into her own food, the morning sun catching the edge of her cheekbone. He wasn't used to mornings like this. No phone buzzing, no team waiting on decisions, just quiet and her. What made you start doing this? He asked. She wiped her mouth with her sleeve. My dad ran charters out of this area for 30 years. I grew up on the water, took over when he passed. Ferris nodded slowly. You ever think about leaving, doing something else? I did once, she said. Moved to Portland for a while, tried the whole landlocked routine. Office job, apartment with a lease, even had a boyfriend who thought he could fix boats better than I could. She glanced out at the horizon. Didn't stick. What happened? She hesitated. He wanted me to sell the boat, said it was holding me back. Ferris frowned. Did you? I told him where to shove it. Ferris laughed, and she gave a brief nod of satisfaction. I don't like being told what to do, she added, voice quieter now. Especially not by someone who doesn't understand what this life means to me. He studied her, noticing the tension in her jaw, the way she gripped the edge of the plate with one hand. There was a story there, but she wasn't offering more. He didn't push. After breakfast, they pulled anchor and headed farther out. The wind had picked up and the sea was choppier than the day before. Briar moved like she was part of the boat, adjusting the throttle and ropes without hesitation. Ferris stood near the stern, holding onto the railing as a spray of seawater hit him square in the chest. I warned you about the blazer, she called out from the wheel. He looked down at the soaked fabric, then back at her. I'll admit when I'm wrong. That might be a first, she said. He stepped toward the wheelhouse. I've had to be right a lot, comes with the job. Let me guess, you make the decisions, everyone else just nods and agrees. Not always, he said, but most people don't question me. Then you must be bored out of your mind, she said, glancing at him. He tilted his head. Are you questioning me right now? I'm saying maybe it's time someone did. He leaned against the frame beside her, the engine humming beneath their feet. You do realize you're the first person in years who's talked to me without pretending I'm some kind of walking headline. That's supposed to impress me. No. But it might explain why I haven't left this boat yet. She met his gaze, and for a moment, the only sound was the wind and the water slipping beneath the hull. Later that afternoon, they docked at a tiny marina on one of the smaller islands. Briar insisted they needed to pick up fuel and ice, and Ferris followed her down the dock, boots slipping slightly on the wet boards. The island was quiet, the shops mostly closed until summer crowds returned. They stopped at a general store with peeling paint and a porch swing gently swaying in the breeze. Briar talked with the older man behind the counter like they'd known each other forever. Ferris watched her laugh at something he said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "You're not from around here," the man said, turning to Ferris. "No," Ferris said, offering his hand, "just visiting." "Briar doesn't usually bring visitors around. You must be someone special." Briar grabbed a bag of ice from the cooler. "Don't start, Cal," Ferris raised an eyebrow. "Should I take that as a compliment?" Cal chuckled. "You can take it however you like." On the walk back to the boat, Ferris glanced at her. "You really don't bring people out here?" She adjusted the strap of the bag over her shoulder. "Not often." "Why me?" She didn't answer right away. "Then, because you looked like you needed it more than most." Back on the water, the late afternoon sun hung low, streaking the sky in gold. Briar cut the engine and let them drift in a quiet cove, the water calm and glassy. Ferris sat near the bow, pulling off his shoes and letting his feet dangle over the side. "You always this quiet in the evenings?" he asked. She settled beside him, knees pulled to her chest. "Only when there's something worth listening to." He tilted his head. "Like what?" She closed her eyes. "Like the way the water changes when the tide shifts, or how the gulls go silent right before dusk." He watched her, the way her body relaxed into the rhythm of the boat. "You're peaceful." She opened her eyes, looked at him. "And you're not." "No," he said. "I'm not." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something unspoken, something that hummed between them. Ferris reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone. The screen was blank, no signal, no emails, no demands. He powered it off completely and dropped it into his bag. Briar's eyes caught the motion. "You really shutting it all off?" "For as long as I can," she nodded once. "Then, good." As the sky turned amber, Ferris leaned back, letting his head rest against the railing. "I didn't think I'd find anything out here," he said, and now he looked at her. "Now I'm not so sure I want to leave." Rain tapped steadily against the cabin roof, a soft rhythm that filled the quiet. Ferris sat at the small table below deck, flipping through a weathered book he'd found tucked beside the bed, a log of past fishing trips, dates and catches scrawled in pen. A few pages had water damage, some corners curled and stained with what looked like coffee. One entry caught his eye, written in a different hand, looping, uncertain script, August 3rd. "First trip without Dad. Engine stalled halfway out. Thought I'd ruined everything, but I managed. I got us home." Somehow, he closed the book just as Briar stepped down the ladder, her hair damp and clinging to her neck. "Storm's passing slow," she said, peeling off her rain jacket and hanging it on a hook. "We'll be stuck here for a while." Here was a tiny harbor they'd pulled into late the previous night. The wind had picked up too fast, and Briar had chosen safety over schedule, docking at a half-abandoned pier beside a shuttered bait shack. "I don't mind," Ferris said, setting the book aside. She glanced toward it. "You found the log. I wasn't snooping." "I don't care if you were." He waited, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she moved to the galley and opened a cupboard, pulling down 2 mugs and a tin of something that smelled like cinnamon. "My mom used to make this when we got caught in storms," she said, filling the kettle. "Said it kept the nerves warm. You get nervous out here?" "Not anymore." She leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "But I used to. First few years, every time the wind shifted, I thought I'd end up in the rocks." He watched her, noting the faint scar above her left eyebrow, something he hadn't seen before. You ever actually crash? Once, she admitted. Tore the rudder clean off. I was 22. Thought I could outmaneuver a squall. What happened? I sat on the deck in the pouring rain and cried until the Coast Guard found me. He didn't laugh. He didn't offer sympathy either. Instead, he said, that's the kind of failure most people don't come back from. I didn't have a choice, she said, pouring hot water into the mugs. This boat's all I had left. She passed him one, the ceramic warm in his hands. You could have sold it, he said. Started over somewhere else. I'm not built for starting over, she said, sitting across from him. I'm built for holding on. He took a sip. The drink was strong, spiced, and unexpectedly good. He let the silence stretch for a moment. Do you ever think about what you'd be doing if things had gone differently? She blinked. What do you mean? If your dad hadn't died? If you hadn't come back? If you hadn't gotten stuck with a stubborn boat and a business in a town that's barely on the map? She tilted her head. You say that like I'm some kind of tragedy. I didn't mean it like that. Well, maybe I don't want something different, she said. Maybe I like this life, he leaned forward, even if it's hard, especially because it's hard. Her words hit something in him he hadn't wanted to name. He'd spent years building an empire, and yet somehow, this woman living on a boat with patched sails and a storm-damaged engine spoke with more certainty than he ever had. I walked away from a deal last week, he said suddenly. She raised her eyebrows. You mean you turned one down? No. I walked out of the meeting, midway through the pitch, left the other partners at the table. He stared into his mug. They told me I was burning a bridge. I told them I didn't care. What was the deal? Merger with a hedge fund in London. Would have doubled our valuation overnight. Briar stayed quiet. I didn't trust them, he said. They wanted control. I've spent 12 years building that company. I built it from nothing. And you didn't want to hand it over, he nodded. Good, she said simply. He looked up, surprised. That's it? You trusted your gut. Nobody does that anymore. He gave a low laugh. My board thinks I've lost my mind. Maybe you have, she said. But maybe that's what you needed. Hours later, the rain stopped. Briar climbed topside and called down, tides turning. We can head out if you want. Ferris stepped onto the deck just as the clouds broke apart, revealing a pale pink sky above the water. She was already untying the lines, moving with practiced efficiency. Where are we going? He asked. There's a stretch near the outer reef. Not many know about it. The fish are bigger out there, he nodded. Let's go then. They sailed in silence for a while, the engine humming low. The water was calm again, the storm's teeth dulled. Briar stood at the wheel, her eyes scanning the horizon. Ferris sat beside her, hands resting on his knees. You don't have to stay, she said finally. When we get back to the mainland, I'll drop you wherever you need. He didn't answer immediately. You think I'm just passing through, he said, aren't you? He turned to her. I've spent most of my life moving, from one city to another. One deal to the next, always looking for the next thing to conquer. She kept her gaze steady. And now, I'm realizing maybe I've been chasing the wrong things. The boat rocked gently beneath them. You don't know me, she said. I know enough, he replied. I know you fight for what you care about. I know you don't pretend to be something you're not. And I know being near you makes me want to stop running. Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. I don't want to be a detour in your life, Ferris. You're not. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, the part of her that had been waiting for someone to leave didn't brace for impact. I don't do halfway, she said softly. He stepped closer. Neither do I. And when their lips met, it wasn't rushed or hesitant. It was the inevitable collision of two people who had been moving toward each other from the moment the boat left the dock. The kiss was raw, certain, and when it broke, their foreheads touched, breath mingling in the hush of the open sea. I'm not going back tomorrow, he said. She closed her eyes. Good, she whispered. Because I wasn't ready to let you go. The engine was silent, the only sound the gentle creak of the ropes as the blue wren rocked in her slip. The harbor lights cast golden reflections across the still water. Ferris stood on the dock, a duffel slung over one shoulder, but his body angled toward the boat like he hadn't decided whether he was leaving or staying. Briar was finishing a final check near the wheelhouse, her hands moving with habitual precision, but her eyes flicked to him more than once. "You didn't say where you're going," she said, not looking up. "I haven't figured that out yet." Briar tightened the lashing on a cleat. "You could stay in town a few days. There's a guest house near the bluff. The owner still owes me for getting his outboard running last fall." He stepped closer, setting the bag on the bench where they'd eaten breakfast days earlier. "That's not why I'd stay." She finally met his gaze, but her expression was unreadable. He could see the wall going up, piece by piece. "You said you didn't do halfway," she said. "This life, it's not a weekend escape. I can't be something you come back to when the office gets too loud." "I know that." She crossed her arms, leaning one hip against the railing. "Then tell me why you're really still here." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small folder. "I had my assistant send over the paperwork this morning. I stepped down from the board." Briar blinked, the lines in her forehead deepening. "You what?" "I resigned." She stared at him. "You're Ferris Langston. You don't just step down. I do now." "Why?" "Because I finally saw what it was costing me." She didn't speak, and he stepped onto the deck, closing the distance between them. "I was living by someone else's definition of success. The power, the money, it was all noise. But out here with you, I could finally hear myself think. And I realized I've been chasing the wrong things for too long." Her eyes searched his, guarded still. "So what happens now?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I want to figure it out with you." Briar lowered her eyes, her voice quieter. "I don't want to lose who I am trying to fit into someone else's world. I'm not asking you to change. I'm trying to change mine." She looked up, and something in her expression began to soften. "You're not just saying this because you're caught in a post-vacation haze." He laughed under his breath. "I had my driver fly up from Boston earlier today. He brought my passport and half a dozen contracts. I handed him back a letter of resignation and told him not to wait." Briar stared. "I'm not leaving this harbor without knowing if there's a real future here," he said. She took a slow breath. "I've never had anyone choose this life." "Then let me be the first." A quiet settled over them, heavy with everything that had not yet been said. Then she stepped forward and rested her palms flat against his chest. "You're not what I expected," she murmured. "Neither are you." Their foreheads touched, and for a long moment the world held still. Later that week, the island town buzzed with its first spring festival. Ferris stood at the edge of the dock, wearing a denim shirt rolled to his elbows, sleeves faintly damp from hauling crates of folding chairs for the local firehouse. Children ran past with kites, and the scent of grilled oysters filled the breeze. Briar was beside him, hair loosely pinned back, a smudge of salt on her cheek. She was laughing at something the mayor had said about the lobster races, her hand casually linked with his. Ferris had never felt more grounded. "People are starting to think you're sticking around," she said, nudging him with her shoulder. "I am. You sure you're ready for a life where your biggest meeting is with the guy who runs the bait shop?" "As long as you're at the table," he said. "I'll be there." She turned to him, fully serious now. "I don't do fairy tales, Ferris." "I'm not offering one," he said. "I'm offering something real, messy, unpredictable but real." Her fingers tightened around his. "I can work with that." That night, the town gathered at the boathouse for the festival's closing bonfire. Ferris stood beside Briar, watching the flames stretch upward, the stars above them sharp and bright. One of the fishermen approached with a guitar, strumming out a tune that made a few couples sway. Ferris turned to Briar. "Dance with me?" She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. "You're not going to step on my toes, are you?" "Only if you make fun of my footwork." They moved together slowly, the sound of waves behind the music, her body fitting against his like it had always belonged there. Across the crowd, Cal raised a drink in their direction. "Looks like the city boy's staying," he said to no one in particular. Briar didn't hear. She was too busy tilting her head up toward Ferris, her voice low. "So what now, Langston?" He leaned in, brushing her temple with his lips. "Now we build something of our own." "Right here," she smiled, eyes shining in the firelight, and for the first time since he could remember, Ferris wasn't chasing anything. He'd already found it. A month later, the town had grown used to Ferris Langston. His name no longer drew curious whispers or speculative glances when he walked into the hardware store or helped unload crates at the fish market. He was no longer the outsider in expensive shoes, but the man who had quietly bought 2 broken-down boats just to donate their parts to repair a local school's marine program. The man who didn't flinch when asked to scrub barnacles or haul nets. The man who had fallen, unmistakably and entirely, for Briar Gentry. She stood across the deck from him now, barefoot, arms streaked with paint, studying the newly varnished railing of the Blue Wren with a tilted head. "It still leans slightly to port," she said, wiping her hands on her shorts. "But I guess it's part of her charm." Ferris glanced up from where he was tightening a bolt near the cleat. "Are you talking about the boat or me?" "You," she said. "The boat's more predictable," he laughed, stretching his back with a groan. "That hurts. Truth usually does." He walked over and kissed her shoulder, the gesture unhurried. She let him linger, her head tipping slightly to rest against his. "You know, there's a boat slip open at the far end of the harbor," she said after a moment. He traced a finger along the curve of her arm. "Are you suggesting I get my own boat?" "I'm suggesting you stop sleeping on mine," she said. "Unless you want to declare yourself the world's first live-in deckhand." He leaned back to look at her. "Is that your way of asking me to move in permanently?" Her lips curved. "You've already got half your clothes in my cabin. I'm just trying to make it official." He smiled, then turned serious. "I've been thinking about building something here, something lasting." She raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "A marine restoration center. Education programs, coastal cleanup initiatives, maybe even youth sailing training. There's federal grant money for it, and I've already started drafting the proposal." She blinked. "You're serious?" He nodded. "I want to invest in this place. Not just with money, with time, with purpose." Briar looked at him, eyes narrowing in that way she did when she was trying to see beneath the surface of someone. "You've changed." "No," he said. "I've finally stopped hiding who I was always supposed to be." She reached for his hand, her grip firm. "If you're doing this, you're not doing it alone." He kissed the back of her hand. "I wouldn't want to." By the end of the week, the town council had approved Ferris's proposal. Briar stood beside him in the local town hall as he outlined his vision to a packed room, his voice steady, but his hand never leaving hers. When he finished, the applause was louder than either of them expected. Afterward, they sat on the hood of Briar's rusted pickup, parked along the bluff overlooking the harbor. The sun dipped low, casting the water in hues of molten gold. "You handled that well," she said. "Didn't even mention stock returns once." "I'm evolving," he said. "Next, I'll start wearing Carhartt and quoting fishing almanacs." She nudged his arm. "Don't push it." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "I've been thinking about that festival night, the bonfire and the dance. That was the night I realized something." She looked up. "What?" "I didn't want another moment of my life without you in it." Her breath caught. "I've been chasing the next big thing for so long, I didn't realize it was you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Briar froze. "I know you're not someone who needs grand gestures," he said, "but I also know you deserve every one of them." He opened the box to reveal a ring delicate, with a pale sea glass stone set in weathered silver, handcrafted by a local artisan whose shop Briar passed every day. Her eyes shimmered, her lips parted, but no sound came out. "I want to marry you, Briar Gentry. Not because it's the next logical step, but because I can't imagine my life without waking up beside you, anchoring next to you in calm and storm, building something that's ours." She stared down at the ring, then back at him. "I thought I wasn't the type to get proposed to," she whispered. "You're not," he said. "You're the type who gets chosen every day, over and over." She slid the ring onto her finger and kissed him, fingers curling into his shirt, the kiss deep and certain. "You're mine now, Langston," she said against his lips. "No take-backs. Wouldn't dream of it." They married 3 weeks later on the deck of the Blue Wren, with the harbor glittering behind them and gulls wheeling overhead. The entire town came some standing on docks, others leaning out from nearby boats, cheering as Briar walked barefoot down the aisle in a seafoam green dress, her braid threaded with wildflowers. Ferris wore a linen shirt and no tie, his eyes locked on her like nothing else existed. When they said their vows, they didn't recite tradition. They spoke plainly, honestly, quietly. And when they kissed, it was not a promise of perfection, but of permanence. That night, instead of a reception hall, they held a clambake on the shore. Children danced in the surf. Elders shared stories around the fire, and Briar, now Briar Gentry Langston, stood with her husband as fireworks bloomed above the water. A year later, the Marine Center opened. Briar ran the sailing program, her voice carrying across the bay as she taught teenagers how to read the tide. Ferris managed the center's operations, but his happiest moments were out on the water, trailing behind the Blue Wren in the modest boat he'd bought and named after her, the Wild Briar. They didn't chase anything anymore, because they had chosen each other, and they had already arrived.